Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Water Center at Penn's Water Exchange Speaker Series. I'm Howard Newkrug. I'm the director of the Water Center at Penn. We are delighted today to have Yvonne Forrest with us. She's the director of Houston Water. Today, Yvonne's going to talk to us about preparing for climate change in the wake of Houston's decades-long string of water crises. Before we start, I want to remind you that this event is being recorded and we will be posting on our website and social media for anyone who is not able to listen to the program today. Next slide, please. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Water Center, we are an applied research center focused on the 21st century challenges facing urban water systems, the watersheds that support them, and the communities that rely on them. Our work leverages the principles of good science, integrated one water management, attaining urban resiliency and sustainability, and the values of human equity, fairness, and affordability. We offer a series of programs, research opportunities, courses, and publications in our effort to mentor and train the next generation of global water leaders. We welcome anyone interested in urban water issues to learn, grow, and collaborate with us. You can do this via our website, social media, or email. All of them are listed here. Next slide, please. Moving on to the program, after Yvonne's presentation, the remainder of the program will be a discussion with Q&A. We want to hear your questions, so please send them to us via the Q&A icon on your screen. Please do not type questions for the speaker into the chat. We will get to as many questions as we can. Let me begin by introducing Yvonne Forrest to all of you. Yvonne is the director of Houston Water, responsible for the operation and maintenance of a complex system of water, stormwater, and wastewater pipes, pumps, treatment facilities. With over 1,600 employees and an annual budget of over $650 million, Yvonne's utility provides drinking water, manages the stormwater, and treats the wastewater for a population of over 2.2 million people in the greater Houston area. Before entering public service, Ms. Forrest spent 15 years as an engineer in Houston's energy sector. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in chemical engineering from the University of South Carolina. Ms. Forrest also serves on the board of directors of some of the most prestigious water professional organizations, such as the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, the U.S. Water Alliance, and the Water Research Foundation. Yvonne is a friend and colleague of mine in a network of 50 of the world's most innovative global water CEOs. At a conference several years ago, she introduced the world to Aisha Niang, an assistant director of the utility. I tell you this for two reasons. One, to give a shout out to Aisha, hi Aisha, and also highlight Yvonne's commitment to mentoring the next generation of water leaders, especially women and persons of color. I now turn it over to Yvonne.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. Hopefully when I conclude my presentation, each of you will know a little bit more about what one utility is facing with respect to climate change. Next slide, please. So as Howard said, Houston Water has over 1,600 team members. We provide drinking water using 3 surface water treatment facilities, 49 groundwater plants, and over 7,000 miles of distribution lines. Wastewater-wise, we have 39 wastewater plants, and I'd like you to take a minute to just absorb that. And right now, 382 lift stations and a little over 6,000 miles of sanitary force mains and gravity sewer. Next slide, please. So the city of Houston, city limits is about 650 square miles. And we just show this slide so that you can understand how many other US cities can fit inside our city limits. However, we also are regional providers. And so there's another 2.4 million people we serve for drinking water outside of our city limits because Houston region suffers from subsidence, but that's another completely different presentation. Next slide, please. So this is what I'm really here to talk to you about today. It's a weather timeline, and I chose icons to illustrate what Houston really felt during these events. In 2008, by far was not our first hurricane, but this was a Cat 2 and really turned into a wind event for us. 2011, we had a drought of record. 2015, 16, those are not just, holidays for us. Those are significant rain events. And then 2017 was Hurricane Harvey, followed shortly by Tropical Storm Imelda and then Winter Storm Uri. Next slide, please. Because I love data, I had to really give you the stats on this. And we'll talk you through some of these events and how we dealt with the changing environment that we're operating in. So as I said, Hurricane Ike was a Cat 2 when it hit the Houston region. For us, it turned into a wind event that had power outages. And after Hurricane Ike, we went through a major effort to install generators and quick connects throughout our water and wastewater system so that should we have another power outage during a hurricane or post-hurricane, we could restore the water system. Then the drought of record in 2011, 45 weeks, 95% of the state in a stage of drought. It was something we'd never experienced. We are very dependent on surface water, and once your reservoir levels start dropping, people don't really understand where their water comes from, which is wastewater discharges upstream. And so that, these were hard conversations to have with people, but they really needed to understand how and why we conserve water in a region that gets over 50 to 60 inches of rain annually. Right after the drought, it ended with heavy rains. There were forest fires during the drought, and this quickly changed our water quality. The reason I highlighted it here, because it resulted in us actually shutting down one of our surface water plants. The water quality changed so quick when all of that forested area that burned, that got washed into our watershed, we could not treat it. We could not coagulate it. We could not filter it. Had no choice but shut down one of our surface water facilities. Then the holiday floods of the next 2 years, the probabilities that I've noted here are based on Atlas 14. And they were updated in 2018 because we had had so many heavy rain events. These were not 10-year, 100-year, and 50-year events when they happened. They were reclassified because we had so many heavy rain events. These are 24-hour totals, not the full event totals that hit our region. And then, of course, 2017 was Hurricane Harvey. I've got a few more slides for that, but now it's a 500-year event. When it happened, it was a 1,000-year event. And then, as I said, Tropical Storm Imelda and then Winter Storm Uri. Next slide, please. So Hurricane Harvey. I'm told that the National Weather Service had to add that bright blue to their lexicon because so much rain fell in that 5-day period. And what I want to highlight for you on this slide is, while Houston is the focus of my conversation, this was a regional event. So when you think about your emergency plans and chemical distribution and where to get equipment from, if the entire region is being hit, you have to reach further out to get assistance. And on this particular one, it was not just Houston. Actually, South Texas got the hurricane winds and was absolutely devastated by Hurricane Harvey. This slide is really just emphasizing the rain. We had some winds, but mostly Harvey was a rain event for us. Next slide, please. What I'm showing you here are the orange stars and the red stars are the location of our wastewater treatment plants and lift stations in proximity to the floodway, the 100-year floodplain, the 500-year floodplain, and any named flood zone. I haven't updated the slides since we've consolidated some facilities. But this is the information we are considering as we're moving forward. Um, there are lots of things you have to take into account. Like when you're trying to make repairs, you have to elevate critical components. We are still working with FEMA on the possibility of consolidating some of these 39 plants into a lesser number. We have not finished those negotiations yet. And then some things that are under construction, we stopped and had to reevaluate where we were building it and the elevation of those critical components while it was still on paper. Next slide, please. And this slide is two of our wastewater treatment plants on the west side of town. Some of the water is due to the historic flooding from Harvey, but the majority of the water you see in these facilities is due to an Army Corps of Engineer upstream impoundment. Another storm after Harvey was beginning to form in the Gulf, and they made a decision to release the water so that they could capture the water from the next storm. We could not access these facilities for over 14 days. And the picture on the left shows the buildings. That area of Houston is called the Energy Corridor. A lot of petrochemical companies have headquarters in this area and were delayed in bringing staff back because they had no access to wastewater treatment. And so I partnered with our police department actually to get their helicopters to get these pictures for us daily, so that when you're giving the message to the public that yes, your street may be dry, but you cannot wash your clothes, you cannot start using your facilities in your home, you can't bring business back because I have no place for the waste to go. These pictures were really helping us get that message across. Next slide, please. So here we are about 2 years past Harvey. We've not had a major rain event, and the illustration on the left is showing you that early in September, we were actually in the abnormally dry stage of drought. So my team and I were really planning for a dry fall and beginning conservation messaging. And within a week, Imelda formed, I believe she formed in the Gulf. We did not have a lot of notice. And in 2 days, she dropped over 44 inches of rain. It was the fourth wettest event in Texas and the seventh in the US. And to go from the week before having drought and conservation conversations to another flood in our region was devastating, but we pivoted fairly quickly. Next slide, please. And then Winter Storm Uri. We are about 10 weeks out from Uri right now. And the point of this particular slide was our region had 44 hours of sub-freezing temperature. I am in Houston, Texas. We design for 95 degrees, 90+% humidity. None of our systems are designed for 44 hours of sub-freezing temperature. Next slide, please. So on this chart, what I'm showing you, that red line is our 3-year average of production for our entire water system. The dark blue line is where we were last year with the bars. The light blue are showing what the demand was on the system during the height of the storm. And most of this was due to private side main breaks, irrigation systems, water lines in the homes. Not only is the water and wastewater system not designed for sub-freezing temperature, most of our homes are not designed for sub-freezing temperature. Imagine the people that elevated their homes to be above the floodplain and didn't insulate under it, and now their pipes broke. So that's a lot of what you're seeing on this particular slide. Next slide, please. And then just a few pictures of our piping. You can see it's not insulated. I'm sorry, the picture on the right seems to be rotated, but that's an overflow weir that's frozen. Next slide, please. And you can see here another, I think that's the drinking water side on the left, coolers. Even the stairs, our team had to use to access some of the equipment covered in ice during Winter Storm Uri. Next slide, please. So as we plan for the future, we're trying to be good citizens to our customer base. We want to constantly be a service that they don't think about. And imagine the messaging when you're trying to tell people who have no heat in their house, no power for days, that now they have to boil water. And that's if they have water. If they have a leak somewhere, you're trying to talk them through how to shut their water off. To be sustainable. These are words that people are bouncing around as they're new, but these are not new words to a utility. Equitable. When you have 650 square miles, you're trying to spend your money where you can fix the most problems, but you have to take into account your entire customer base. And that leads us to keeping things affordable. We are presenting in the next, tomorrow, I believe, our request for a rate increase. In a pandemic, we need a rate increase to address our infrastructure needs and to address a recent consent decree that was entered for sanitary sewer overflows. And this is a tightrope that, all utilities are having to face these days. So, with these slides, I hopefully you understand what this one utility is dealing with here in the South, and our impacts due to climate change. Next slide, please. So with that, Howard, let's answer some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Yvonne. I can appreciate you being here and giving us this overview of what's going on. It's interesting to me because last month, I believe, we had Mike Webster from Cape Town. He's the general manager for Cape Town water system. And they just went through this incredible drought period. And one of his slides really showed it had 4 different compartments to it. One was drought, another one was flood, forest fires, and water quality. And I looked at that, I said, that's just like what this same slide I saw from Australia. From Perth, Australia, and I start looking, seeing that there's climate change happening everywhere, and what's so interesting about your list, because I put drought, flood, forest fires, water quality, yeah, hitting all of those. Then you have deep freeze.
Yes.
I don't think anybody was really expecting that one to come about, but it's fascinating that happened, and well, not sad, but fascinating that it happened, and the impacts it has in an area like Houston, Texas, and just curious, so obviously now there's a lot of things to look back on and to learn, and in terms of resilience, sustainability, how do you do things differently? And I'll just throw out a whole bunch of things. You choose whatever you want to talk about, but new development, this is always a problem I understand with how new development happens in your region, and there's weatherization. I mean, people being able to deal with a situation like this, because it can cost lives, and then when you look at the utilities, and I don't know, this is just a personal geeky water engineer question, but in Philadelphia, we all our water pipes are 4 feet or more below the surface of the ground. And that's to prevent the frost that can go up to about 3.5 feet from hitting those pipes. And I assume you guys are not quite that deep.
Actually, we are about 4 feet. But like Philadelphia, there's a lot of congestion underground. And so you end up rerouting water lines occasionally to make room for all the telecom lines, the wastewater and the stormwater, but yeah, as a rule, we try to put them 4 feet. One of our challenges is we have a gumbo clay soil. So one of the reasons we're dealing with subsidence, but in a drought, it shrinks and that causes main breaks. And when it's wet, it swells, and that causes main breaks. So we can't win with the soils here. And to address some of the other items that you brought up, after Hurricane Harvey and the update of Atlas 14, our floodways and everything, flood maps were updated, and the city and the county both adopted stringent codes for new construction. And depending on how much the renovation is going to cost, you may have to, meet those new codes in existing construction. And then there's a concerted effort to remove people from the floodway to buy out those buildings and homes. But as far as winterization or weatherization, we've not had a full-blown effort on that. We do have a climate plan and a resilient Houston plan put forth by administration, but they're only a few years old. So we're trying to wrap our heads around these large topics.
Yes, lots of work to be done, lots of new innovations that need to be thought of, and how we live. And I know in other areas I'll just go with Philadelphia, and when we have our flood events, there's a very easy solution that us engineers now, and that's moving people out of the way of floods and moving people and property away from flooding areas. And but that's much easier said than done. And we're gonna have to grapple with that into our future. Let's think about how we're gonna manage all this.
One of our facilities in the floodway was identified in 2014, I believe, in the early range, 2015. And FEMA says, you need to build a wall. And we're like, okay, we'll build a wall. In 2016, with those other rain events, it flooded again because the wall wasn't finished. 2017, the wall was finished and Harvey came and it flooded a third time. So that's one of the facilities we're working with FEMA to relocate, because it all ties together with affordability. If I put all of my funds to relocate the capacity and the force mains from this one facility, there's a whole lot of the city that would not get their needs met at the same time.
Yes, and that reminds me of a story from when I was in Amsterdam, looking at their flooding systems and what they're doing. Obviously, they've been dealing with this for 500, 600 years. And when I met with the dike master of Delft, and that's really his name, he's in charge of the dikes, and it's very, very, very powerful government position. And I'm talking to him about how incredible it is that they're doing all this construction still in 2015, whatever the year was I was there. And he said, Howard, it doesn't matter. The higher we build the dikes, the bigger the eventual catastrophe will be. And I think I think Holland has gained that expertise, that it's really a combination of things that need to be done, and this building the walls is not necessarily the answer. But,
you're correct.
Yeah. Okay. So I have questions from the audience. One is about decentralized wastewater treatment facilities. This person who wrote in said that there are a lot of communities in Houston that utilize on-site treatment systems for wastewater. Does your management address this, and do you approve of these?
So we have 39 wastewater treatment facilities today. So I can't think of getting much more decentralized than that for us. And as long as they are for building systems and meet the regulatory requirements, we do not try to take on additional facilities. In fact, we're trying to consolidate, so we don't have 39 facilities.
Right. So the wastewater plants in the US are moving towards consolidation, regionalization, and in the Northeast, that really happened the 1980s with the construction grants program. Everything was all these systems in our regions were combined, and so we're still moving in that direction. And then there's this group of folks out there who's really looking to decentralize onto a more of a community basis. And I mean, it's an interesting concept, but is kind of like a different world from where you and I sit and what we're
Well,
trying to accomplish.
Houston grew by annexation, which is how we ended up with 39 facilities. And when you have limited resources, spread that thin, you start getting to a point where you're just you're reactive. You're not
Yeah.
proactive.
Yeah. Here's another question for you. Has your department estimated the future capital costs to make the system properly protected so these major calamities do not happen again? They recognize the error in their folly in their question by adding on, I am sure it's in the billions.
So just focusing on our recently approved consent decree, we are estimating an additional $2 billion just in our wastewater system to resolve the non-compliance issues in the consent decree. We are building a new drinking water facility to address subsidence and the regional provider role. That's 1.7 billion just for that 320 million gallon a day facility, plus infrastructure to bring the water to there and transmission beyond there. So well over 3 billion to just address that. Those two things alone do not have anything in addition for multiple disasters. We did elevate the design on the water treatment plant. We are taking flooding into consideration in the consent decree, but that's 5 billion, and I haven't even started talking about,
Right.
through disaster mitigation.
Yes, and I keep relating this to Philly because our utilities are relatively the same size and serve similar populations, although you serve a lot more Texans than we do here in Philadelphia. We're looking at these same things and trying to figure out also what the long-term solution is. And our consent decree only came out to maybe $2 billion for combined sewers. And I often, when I gave lectures like you're doing right now, I would end it and say, people would ask me about the program and how's it going, would I do it again? And I said, if I had my own druthers and I could make my own priorities, I would have taken that $2 billion and rebuilt my drinking water plants. And but we're so siloed in the U.S. that that's not even a thought that comes into our heads. But there is a big money problem. Do you think the work that Biden's doing is going to be of sufficient help?
Well, we are encouraged. Some of the commentary that we've given to the administration and others about this is, at the end of the day, we can only move as fast as our ratepayers can afford. And so if this is a combination of low interest or no interest loans and grants, then yes, it's going to be a big help for the utility. If it is another program that has a lot of loops that you have to jump through, and I've got to build staff just for the application and then find a way to fund it, the payments back, then it's going to be a slow process moving forward. We're not going to see the jobs come forward as they're hoping.
Yeah, the experience, at least from the last stimulus package, was it solved an awful lot of problems for our cities and kept things going. But it was more of a bubblegum. It was more of a stopgap to allow you to continue doing things that you've been planning to do, but you didn't have the money anymore to do them. So it was a question of stopping work entirely or getting this money and continuing what you're trying to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Next question. Has your department estimate for the future capital costs of the system? I gave you that question already. Would you like to answer that one again? Let's see. Here's one from one of our professors at Penn, Simon Richter. I think you mentioned that Houston Water strives to be a utility that no one notices, meaning, I guess, that the system service is continuous and without mishap, right? And
Correct.
is it possible that climate change requires a different way of thinking about how the public interacts with and is informed about water service? In other words, one that involves the public in recognizing the precariousness of the system under extreme conditions.
Absolutely. And I think the one water um, conversations that we're having is really taking us to that point, and the resilience conversations, because most utilities strive to be below the radar. You know, people don't know where the water comes from or where their waste goes, but we're living with all of this right now, and we're all impacted by it. And I've been remiss, one of the things I didn't mention was when you have a staff of team members, um, they're living this and serving the public every day. And so, you know, when it's freezing and they're at a utility quadrant office and we don't have power there, and they're getting phone calls from their families that don't have power, you know, you have to support people that keep the utility running and help them support their families. And the same thing with floods. When Houston flooded, it didn't miss our team members' homes. Many of them, you know, had homes that flooded, and we're still here. So, and so when you talk about becoming more part of the community and not so invisible, I don't think we'll have that choice going forward. I think they need to understand why the rates are where they are, why conservation is important, what they can do to support the utility. Um, and, you know, it definitely is a paradigm shift, because, you know, we loved being invisible and behind the scenes, and I don't think we have that choice going forward.
Yeah, the word that we hear a lot is trust.
Mhm.
And this is particularly a time in our I guess our nation's history that trust is pretty low.
Yeah,
And you know, and what is trust? That, you know, in one sense, I think the old guard of water managers was talking about trust in terms of don't worry, everything's good.
exactly.
And now we're saying what trust means is we need to be more open,
And transparent, you know.
transparent. Yeah, and deal with the dual message. My dual message has always been um, the water is safe to drink, and we need a lot more money because our system's aging and falling apart. And how
Exactly.
you put those two things together and develop trust and move forward together is always been something difficult for I think for anybody, but certainly for our utilities.
Yes.
Let me see. Okay, you're not getting out of the decentralized plants question that easily. I think here's the one that's someone who's trying to express that what you know, when you're talking decentralized, you're talking that there are 39 facilities,
Mhm.
and some of these questions are more geared towards the you know, a private reuse site in a building, office building or residential apartment building. So let me ask you this question this way. You mentioned decentralized plants managed by the utility, but what about private on-site reuse systems at the building scale, campus scale? San Francisco, LA, and now Austin all incentivize these approaches to help to diversify the water supply portfolio for the long-term planning.
I think everything is on the table. We've not gotten that far in our planning yet. I know we do support a lot of the early initiatives. Houston has even permitted a lot of our effluent for reuse purposes, but we haven't marketed it. So we don't have a big network of purple pipe. So I think as we redevelop the city and we move forward, everything is on the table, and, you know, things should be considered, but we're not at the point where we're offering incentives for people to be a bit more self-sufficient.
Okay, great. Okay, we'll go to another question. And yeah, as I mentioned before, your utility and you and I and my past utility, Philly Water, are both members of this leading utilities of the world.
Mhm.
And as part of um, uh, the cost of entering is that you need to put together a slideshow that shows the 3 biggest challenges that your utility has and the innovations you've used to
Mhm.
find them. So I'm not asking you to repeat that presentation, but if there's any nuggets in there, love to hear about it.
I can tell you that we are exploring more technology, not just to reduce our team members, but because you need to know what's happening sooner. So on our wastewater system, we're using manhole monitors that not just tell us when the flow changes or the elevation in the manhole changes, but it actually dispatches a work order. So we can have a team respond before a sanitary sewer overflow. And that's definitely a game changer for us, having over 6,000 miles of force main and gravity main, trying to reduce the number of SSOs and having technology be our eyes. On the drinking water side, we've also deployed quite a few pressure monitors, but we're having trouble finding reliable leak detection given our soil conditions.
Hmm.
But we're trying to use technology to augment our staffing, and that's been the biggest focus. But we're also open to doing things differently. We've done several studies on beneficial reuse of our drinking water and wastewater sludge. Nobody wants the drinking water stuff. It's river bottoms with no nutrients.
Mm.
And so we're constantly looking for somebody that can help us find a beneficial use for that. But wastewater, we were on a good track with fertilizer, but now PFAS and PFOA, we're kind of balancing those issues. And so as a large utility, we're always piloting new technologies and knowledge capture and things like that. But at the end of the day, I think every utility's got to find a solution that works for them. And I think we're right now, the focus is on microgrids, especially after the state power outage with Winter Storm Uri. We've looked at quite a few energy solutions, and now the microgrids would be big enough not just to power our utility in that neighborhood, but maybe share the power with another police or fire station, or maybe the community if we build it sufficiently.
This is using methane gas?
Some methane gas, some propane. We're just looking at everything that's possible.
Everything is possible, just to make, what I call it here in Philadelphia is make every facility energy independent.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Our facility, we don't have digesters right now, so some of the things we're looking at for the consolidation effort are digesters so that we can generate the gas.
Right.
And that would be definitely different for Houston.
Yeah. Love to talk to you about that. But let's see, we have a couple more questions here. One is from our friend Rob Puente from LA. He's saying, you handle water, wastewater, and stormwater. Please explain how this benefits Houston in having one voice to address climate issues and infrastructure issues.
So on the stormwater side, I primarily deal with the pumping stations for the stormwater. The county has a flood management district, and we also have a group in Houston that deal with the streets, which are the primary conveyance for us for the stormwater. But it has helped to have a unified Houston water, one water point of view, because as we mentioned earlier, it's very circular. If I don't address the stormwater, then the stream quality affects my wastewater permits.
Yes.
It ends up my wastewater permits because those are point sources, and they can control me where they can't control the stormwater.
Right.
And so it has been useful to be at the table with one voice for the city of Houston.
When I was water commissioner in Philly, and and clearly, I mean, water utilities never had as part of their programs flood management, but no one does. You know, there's no Army, well, there is an Army Corps, but they're not really doing flood management across the country. And there's FEMA, and there's a whole number of different organizations, and federal, state, and local. But really comes back to the utilities and the cities trying to figure out how to manage that, and the amount of money that's needed associated just with that flooding piece is so large that it kind of like can overwhelm drinking water, wastewater utilities such as yours and mine. So that's that's really out there. I remember my my Mayor Nutter, who called me in the middle of the night because there's a problem at the end of a handicapped ramp. There was a woman who couldn't get down it because it was so the pool of water, rainwater, had fallen to the bottom and between the handicapped ramp and the street. And he called me like 3 in the morning. I hope, Mayor, I hope you're not listening. And he said, Howard. And he gave me the address and says, can you take care of this? And I said, yes, yeah, I can take care of it, but please recognize that that's really the streets department and the other department, whatever I said. And he said, Howard, if it looks like water, it's waters. So you can say, well, that's stormwater management, that's flooding, but at the end of the day, it really comes back to our utilities to try to deal with
It really does.
Yeah.
And you want to be responsive. And, one of the things we say, having Houston Water is inside of the Department of Public Works, which is a department in the city, to everyone outside the city. We're the city, and they don't care how we divide it up internally, and so you want to be responsive as the city to the
Yes.
citizens, and even internally, all of the different cost centers and things are just for accounting purposes. At the end of the day, we need a holistic response, because if they put in a storm issue that impacts my water lines or my wastewater lines or my wastewater system, we just end up fighting each other in the streets.
Yeah.
For that underground space.
So here are some questions that I can't help you with because I don't really understand some of the initials. So perfectly okay if you can either. What benchmark is Houston using for SLR projections on either elevating existing critical infrastructure or designing, say, new electrical facilities for wastewater treatment?
So we did bring in an electrical engineering firm to help us interpret for FEMA the updated codes and the necessary things. I can tell you here we are 3.5 years still negotiating, and so we have not been 100% successful explaining to FEMA the need for upgraded electrical systems when something's been underwater for 2 weeks. And so we are looking at the city's codes. We're looking at the international standards for electrical systems. But until we are successful, we haven't really benchmarked one. We're trying everything.
Great. Okay. What is SLR? Why, I don't know if I'm having a brain gap or
You know what? I have a response, but it might be the wrong one. So let's ask
okay.
the
The person who asked the question, oh,
sea level rise.
sea level rise. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's not the one I was looking at.
You see, sea level, there's nothing that impacts sea level, impacts our water, wastewater systems more than sea level rise. And the biggest issues of sea level rise really are on our water systems, but it's not front and center of our vocabulary at this point.
Well, I think for Houston, it's as much subsidence as sea level rise.
Yes.
So
Yes.
to stop the groundwater from being withdrawn, and then the sea level rise on top of it. So again, FEMA's not buying a whole lot of it. So
I believe this next question comes from one of our students, probably in the School of Design.
mhm.
Do you see a role for planners within Houston Water and other water utility departments in planning for climate change?
Oh, definitely. In fact, our One Water initiative is being handled by our infrastructure planning team. Our planner, we have an extensive drinking water model and a wastewater model inside our planning team. And also um, they lead our GIS efforts, because the best way to communicate what's going on is with a map to the public to show them what area the city is being impacted. They also work with our developers and talk about how much capacity we have available whenever someone comes forward, because apparently on the news this morning they were talking about how many people in California are moving to Texas. And so they are developing like crazy in the north and the west side of the city and the county. And we didn't necessarily plan for all of these people.
Yeah.
So yeah, planners have a big part in what we're doing going forward.
Here's another question that I don't know what this is, and I'm sure I'm going to be just realize how stupid I am at the moment. But Atlas, can you describe the process of the Atlas update?
So that is the NOAA.
Okay.
And it's really statistics.
Okay.
I don't think they did the whole country, but because we've had so many major rain events, statistically, they just reran their Atlas models and said, oh, well, that's not a 1 in 100-year storm, that's a 1 in 50-year storm now. And you would have to talk to someone who really works with NOAA and their models to say how they, when they choose to update a part of Atlas 14, and what do they take into account.
Great. And it's interesting because the same questioner asks whether we're doing that in the Philadelphia area. Now that I know what the Atlas update is, I can tell you that we're just in a period of uncertainty. I mean, like you can update all you want, but we're in a period of what I would call gross change. It's happened over the last probably 2 decades, a little bit longer in some more sensitive areas. But what do you do? How do you even start to think about it for the future, and whether this is, this could be right. This could be, a lot of the naysayers could be right. This could be just a 20-year trend, and then all of a sudden everything goes back to the way they've been for the last 100 years. I doubt that. But how do you even take the last 20 years worth of crazy weather and put that into a model that uses data from the 1950s and 1960s? It's hard. It's hard. And how right is it?
And then you have the people who, you have elected officials, board and governance, you have your general public. And if you don't prepare for it, for the next, if I don't winterize and say the winter storm Uri is a once in a generation thing and it happens again next winter, you'll be talking to a new director of Houston Water.
I've used that line a few times for Philadelphia, yes. Careful, because eventually it happens. Let's see where. Well, here's an interesting question, and this is an easy one for you. How did you become interested in water?
So, as a chemical engineer, somehow I fell into what they call outside the boundary line processes. And I started with processed water for cooling towers and boilers. And then I got into industrial wastewater and deep well injection and aeration. And it translates across everything petrochemical. I may not have done that particular distillation process in a chemical plant, but everyone had processed water and everyone had wastewater. And so it just seemed universal. And eventually I got to the point, believe it or not, I didn't want to travel and I started looking locally. I don't think people really promote municipal water systems in a chemical engineering degree. You really look at processes. And so I'm a bit of a unicorn. Most of my counterparts are either electrical or civil engineers, yes, or environmental engineers, where this has been more their curriculum. But I absolutely have fallen in love with it and the community of utility professionals.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I mentioned in my opening, Aisha, And how is she doing? She's still there and
She's
is
still here. She's in charge of all of those 39 wastewater plants. And so our consent decree is about a month since it's been signed, and she's a little hair on fire right now.
okay. Well, she is, to remind the audience, she was one of our next generation water leaders. Thank you for introducing her to all of us. And so I guess that process is working, although it's like one person, it's like, how do you, I guess the question is, how do you make hundreds of thousands of next generation water leaders? And lessons learned from Aisha or others are always going to be very helpful.
And I think it's really, like you said, about mentoring and finding time to make it a priority in all of these associations that have young professionals, and keeping people engaged, because it's so easy to just deal with what's on your desk and not think beyond for the next generation. But I'm looking forward to having the dynamic team here working and paying my pension when I retire.
Very good. Good. As a last question, which, because we talked a little bit about money, the question of affordability, obviously, it was on one of your slides, and is critical in our industry today, and particularly with COVID, and utilities typically are not shutting people off for non-payment, and that's making pretty big deficits in people's operating budgets. How are you guys dealing with that, and how do you help people who can't afford to pay?
We've been surprised by the number of people actually still paying their bills, but we do have not as robust a program as the city of Austin, but we do have a assistance program for elderly and low income customers, and we are looking at expanding that, given some of the conversations happening in Washington. The challenge is always a gift of public funds, and how do you fund any assistance program with ratepayer dollars? And so we're walking that tightrope, but we're looking for a way to make it more of a plank instead of a tightrope.
Great. Yeah, and you mentioned that you're raising rates. How much are you raising them by?
Oh, a lot. But we have what you call impact fees for developers to buy into the system capacity. And so we've balanced a higher increase on the impact fees, and tried to dampen the increase for single family residents. And we're also looking at a conservation program if they stay below 3,000 gallons a month, getting credit on their bill to cover that, to keep people love their green lawns here in Texas.
Yeah. No, there's no changing that. Huh?
There's no change in that. So we're trying to incentivize in our rates, hopefully change in behavior.
Yes. Yeah. I said earlier, I mean, cities like San Francisco, Cape Town, all over Australia, they're having some amount of success with conservation through different behavior. Obviously, the most obvious one is just through changing the rates, but through other types of education and going to other types of sources of water. I mean, I don't know, have you guys looked at or been thinking at all about desal as a potential long-term backup?
It is in our long-term portfolio. By long-term, it's probably over 50 years. Given our geography being downstream, we have 3 large reservoirs, and as long as people keep discharging wastewater, our reservoirs are pretty stable. It was only during the drought that you saw a significant decrease, but they don't dry up because you still have upstream discharges.
Okay, gotcha. We won't explain that to the general public. I know what you're talking about, yes. So I think that's getting close to the end of our time. So I just want to thank you, Yvonne, for participating today. And I've really enjoyed listening to you and having a little dialogue there. And thank you to all the listeners who submitted questions for discussion. This program has been recorded, so it will be made available on our website probably tomorrow. And you'll also be, for the listeners, receiving a feedback survey via email. And please take a few minutes to fill it out so we know how to improve our future programming. If you have suggestions of topics or speakers you would like to hear from, please let us know via the survey. And once again, Yvonne, thank you so much for participating. I know it takes away. You have a few other things that you need to be working on.
Just a few. And thank you for the invitation.
Yes. So thank you very much, Yvonne, and thank you, everybody. Bye-bye, everyone.